So, what advice do you have for a listener right now in how do you ferret out a diet of news that you feel you can trust and rely on? How do you find that, or how do you develop trust?
Well, first of all, you have to educate yourself. Look at you have to look at the byline, the dateline, who's reporting, from where. You have to look at different news organizations. I mean, I still maintain, like, a news organization like Reuters and AP have very, very high standards of reporting. I mean, I'm not saying everything they report 100% is true, but the vast majority of what they
And
report,
if it's not true, they correct it.
and if not true, and they admit it. If you look at, for example, at 60 Minutes, in the whole 55 years history of 60 Minutes, they made few mistakes, and what happened, they admitted it. If you remember, Memogate, in the 60 Minutes ran a story about President Bush Vietnam records. Few of my friends lost their jobs because the story was not true, and CBS, admitted that. If you look at the New York Times is a very important news organization that's been there for years. And, this current administration is a side note for them. It's not the whole history of America. So, but if you look at,
Wait, I love that. This administration is just a side note for them. They've been around so long.
for
They've been through so
in the
many.
200-year history of American politics, 4 years of administration is just it's a side note, of course. So those people, if you look at, but again, the way that, to go back to CBS News, like, okay, the CBS News, now it was controlled. They brought their own people and their own boss and so on. Look what happened at the ratings. They tanked because people stopped watching. You know, it's, so in a way, it's self-defeating. Okay.
Mhm.
So, I mean, look at their recent polls, ratings. They're nothing now. Nobody's watching the news.